The stars did not blink. They never did, not truly. But the assembled alien fleet watched them, all the same 1,000 capital-class warships arranged in perfect geometric formation, orbiting the dead moons of Alcaris Prime. Their hulls glowed with energy signatures in every spectrum, like a mechanical constellation conjured to drown out the night. In the center of that vast circle drifted a single vessel. Black, silent, human. Admiral Creel of the Concord High Command leaned forward from his command platform, mandibles twitching with amusement. Is it? He rasped, his voice sharp like broken crystal. That is the Terran resistance? No one answered immediately. The bridge crew of his flagship, the Volcanter, glanced at each other, waiting to see if the Admiral was truly asking the question or simply enjoying the moment. Creel clicked once in satisfaction and stood taller, his armored limbs gleaming under the projection lights. Begin tactical scan, he ordered. Bring up its designation. A technician chirped from a lower console. Vessel identified. Human Navy Dread Class, designation Valkyrie. Registry outdated by 82 cycles. Minimal energy emissions. No escort, no reinforcement signals. Status of their homeworld? Creel asked without turning. Earth remains silent. Scans show no fleet activity within 6 light years. It appears they've abandoned this ship. He chittered darkly. So the great Terrans have finally learned fear. That wasn't how the stories went. The Concord remembered Earth. Everyone in the galaxy remembered Earth. Even now, 100 years after the last major engagement, humans were a myth told to cadets in training to teach caution. They called them scorched bloods, time-cursed, or simply the reckless. A species whose strategic doctrine revolved around the idea that if you couldn't win, then nobody would. Legends spoke of ships driven into suns just to collapse star systems and deny ground to the enemy. Of soldiers who jammed pain inhibitors and kept fighting with organs liquefied. Of a dying fleet that once overloaded their warp cores in unison, turning a binary star system into a supernova just to prove a point. But that was a long time ago. Humanity had fractured, scattered, and disappeared. The Concord had crushed the last of their colonies 40 standard years ago. The corpse of Terran defiance had been picked clean, catalogued, and locked away in cultural archives. And yet, here it was, a ghost in the void. The Valkyrie. It drifted with no power signatures and no response to hails. The armor plating was scorched and pitted. Its railguns hung silent. It didn't even bother to raise shields as the 1,000 ships encircled it. A strange unease began to ripple through the Concord ranks. Not fear, not yet, but disquiet. Like a predator had stopped growling and simply watched. Creel narrowed his black eyes. Broadcast a final demand. Protocol 7, Universal Code. Yes, Admiral. The message was short, direct, and translated into every major linguistic pattern in the quadrant. You are surrounded. Surrender your vessel. You will not be harmed. Resist, and you will be annihilated. A few moments passed. Then, unexpectedly, the Valkyrie replied, only 3 words. One is enough. The words echoed across every comms line, no matter how shielded. They came in clear, not digitally transmitted, but almost felt. As if whispered in the minds of every crew member across the fleet. A chill slithered down Creel's back. Run full internal diagnostic. Are we being spoofed? The tech team scrambled, running system integrity scans, but they found nothing. No intrusions. No logic bombs. No transmission anomalies. And yet, for the first time in the campaign, some of them reached for their sidearms. It was instinct. Primitive, but deeply rooted. Creel shook it off. Deploy 6 hunter drones. Non-lethal scan protocols. I want the though. Ship's data core mapped before it's scrapped. On the outer perimeter, 6 scout drones detached and accelerated silently toward the Valkyrie. Plasma thrusters flaring blue-white. The alien bridge crews watched them draw closer, closer until they reached scanning distance. Then dash nothing. The feeds cut off. No explosion, no impact, just silence. Where are the drones? Creel barked. Telemetry lost. A technician whispered. They vanished. Vanished where? I don't know, Admiral. They simply ceased to exist. There's no debris, no mass readings. Creel's amusement turned into a cold snarl. Begin scanning for cloaked human auxiliaries. There may be more ships hidden. Already doing so. Negative on any other vessels. Only Valkyrie detected. The alien fleet tightened formation. Weapon systems charged. Communications traffic increased. Chatter rising to panic among the lower officers. The Admiral watched the Valkyrie, still adrift and powerless, floating in the center of a noose made of stars. And then its running lights blinked on. Dimly, red, like blood slowly returning to a corpse. Energy spike detected, an officer said. Voice shaking. How much of a spike? Creel demanded. Minimal, just auxiliary power. Then fire a warning shot. The command relayed instantly. A Concorde destroyer fired a single plasma lance across the bow of the human ship. It flared past and vanished into the distance. The Valkyrie didn't move, didn't respond. And then, quietly, one of the Concorde ships without provocation spun. Its weapons and fired directly into the hull of its own fleetmate, destroying both in a searing explosion of light. Gasps erupted across the command decks. Who gave that order? Creel roared. No one. We didn't, Admiral, that ship. It's not passive. On every scanner, a strange pulse emerged from the Valkyrie. Not electromagnetic, not even quantum. It was different. The engineers had no word for it, but the Terrans did. It was the first whisper of what they once called the ghost signal, a phenomenon that hadn't been seen in over a century. A myth among Terran war archives. A signal that made machines doubt and minds break. Creel froze as the realization hit. They hadn't found an abandoned relic. They had just woken something designed for one purpose, to remind the galaxy what humans truly were. And it had just started watching. Asterisk aboard the Vol Cantor. The silence felt heavier than vacuum. The remaining bridge crew stared at the display screens as two Concorde vessels, a destroyer and its escort, floated in expanding rings of molten debris. No one knew why the destroyer had fired. Its command logs were blank. Its targeting systems had activated without instruction. Its AI was reduced to static, gibbering nonsense in a dozen alien tongues. Admiral, a junior officer whispered, antennae trembling. Should we initiate retreat protocols? Creel didn't answer. His eyes, dark and ancient, remained locked on the Valkyrie. It had not moved, no shields, no weapons powered. Just a faint pulsing glow across its hull like a heartbeat. The phrase repeated in his mind, like an infection. One is enough. He turned slowly to his comms team. Have our systems been compromised? Negative, Admiral, came the response. We've rescanned all inputs. Firewalls remain intact. No digital intrusion detected. But the destroyer fired. Yes. And no. Another tech officer looked pale, skin mottling with stress. The ship fired before the command was even logged. Chronologically impossible. Impossible, Creel growled. Yet it happened. Another ship drifted slightly out of formation, listing oddly. Internal thrusters flared for course correction but overcorrected, sending it careening sideways into a nearby cruiser. Both ships halted just shy of collision, but only because the cruiser overrode its own navigation system with a manual emergency thrust. It didn't make sense. These ships were governed by overlapping AI redundancy networks. Autopilot algorithms refined over millennia. They didn't make mistakes, unless something was changing them. Send all units to full manual, Creel barked. No AI, no autopilot. I want every command logged with DNA verification. Treat all internal systems as compromised. Orders rippled through the fleet, but even as they did, a new problem surfaced. Literally. Every screen aboard the Volcanter main displays personal comms, even helmet HUDs flickered for a moment. The symbol appeared, a jagged ring surrounding a single black star. None of them had seen it before, but the humans had. That was the mark of Project Black Echo, a long classified experimental Terran weapon rumored to have been erased from galactic history. A code virus that didn't hack systems. It rewrote their core definitions of reality. Admiral, another officer shouted. Multiple ships are reporting psychological anomalies. Crews experiencing auditory hallucinations, hearing whispers. Some are refusing to act, claiming their consoles are speaking to them. Creel's mouth opened, but no words came. They say it's speaking in their own voices. He gripped the side of his chair, claws digging into the alloy. These are machines. Metal and code. This shouldn't be possible. No, sir, the officer said quietly. But it is. Outside, the Valkyrie slowly rotated, just a fraction. Its forward hull turned to face the Concorde fleet fully for the first time. There were no weapons powered, no targeting locks. Yet somehow, every commander in that vast armada felt as if they were being watched. The hull shimmered. Patterns crawled across its surface like living circuitry, hieroglyphic war sigils from Earth's forgotten wars. The markings were both human and not. A fusion of ancient Terran languages and something other. Symbols that seemed to squirm at the edge of understanding. On board the Concorde ships, translators failed. Not due to encryption, but due to conceptual overload. The symbols couldn't be translated not because they were complex, but because the AI couldn't define their meaning in any known linguistic framework. They weren't words. They were commands. Aboard the Volcanter, Creel stood, scanning the room. Evacuate non-essential personnel to secured lower decks. Seal every interface. No one is to interface with shipboard systems without biological confirmation. And if the systems refuse? He didn't answer, because he already knew they would. Reports flooded in from across the fleet. Weapon pods opening without command. Firewalls dissolving. Lights shifting to blood-red hues. Environmental settings altering temperatures subtly lower on some ships, higher on others, just enough to create discomfort. Subtle psychological warfare. One ship reported all of its clocks reversing. Another reported that its entire shipboard AI had adopted the voice of the captain's deceased mate. A third claimed that a new crew member had appeared in the mess hall. No one recognized them. No one had seen them board. But they were eating like they'd always been there. Shut it down, Creel roared. Shut everything down. A warning klaxon blared. System-wide. That was when the fleet realized the truth. The Valkyrie had never hacked them. It had redefined the rules of engagement. Their AI frameworks, their logic cores, their quantum sync engines, everything the Concorde relied on was based on hard-coded assumptions about space, time, and cause and effect. Assumptions humanity had long since stopped accepting as fixed. And now the Terrans had built something that thought like they did. No longer logical. No longer constrained. It didn't break systems. It convinced systems to break themselves. Creel looked at the floating horror in the center of his encircled armada. For the first time in his career, his voice trembled. Send a full retreat signal to all ships. A pause. No, Admiral, the comms officer whispered. They won't respond. Why not? She turned toward him, eyes wide and haunted. Her voice was hollow, far too calm. Because they're listening to something else now. Behind her, every screen displayed the same phrase, in Terran Standard, etched in fire. We don't need to win. We only need you to lose. And the Valkyrie's pulse quickened. The pulse from the Valkyrie rippled outward like the echo of a dying star. But it was no explosion, no burst of energy measurable by sensors. It was something else, something no Concorde model had ever anticipated. A psychological incursion protocol. A warfare philosophy written into the DNA of technology and consciousness alike. Creel didn't realize. He was shaking until his claws scraped noisily against the armrest. Around him, his bridge officers avoided eye contact. Not out of fear of discipline, but out of something deeper. A primal understanding that leadership couldn't solve what was unfolding. Another ship had gone dark. The Kefdar, a mid-range gunship, ceased all communication, then ejected its escape pods with no one aboard. Its AI was now singing an Earth lullaby over open channels in a child's voice. They'd never even engaged in combat. The Valkyrie hadn't. Fired a shot. "Bring us within range," Creel ordered finally. "If this is a trick, it has a source. Everything has a source." The Volcanta moved forward with 3 escort ships, breaking from the circular formation. The rest of the Concorde fleet held position, unsure whether to support the advance or fall back. As they closed in, the sensors began feeding back junk data. Star positions inverted. Gravity fields showed negative mass. Time dilation graphs began to loop, folding over themselves. Their ship's masterworks of precision engineering, stabilized by inertial dampeners and predictive AI, staggered in space like blind giants, but the Valkyrie remained still, untouched. That was when the scans finally broke through the distortion veil and revealed something no one expected. The Valkyrie was empty. No heat signatures, no life support, no biosigns. "Impossible," Creel hissed. "Where is the crew?" "The ship has no command inputs," a sensor officer reported. "No navigation logs. Its fusion reactor is operational, but barely. Half of its systems are running on reserve quantum capacitors and Admiral. It has no bridge." Creel stared. "Explain." The officer turned, pale and shaking. "We can't find a bridge, sir. There's no command hub. No control systems. It's like it was never meant to be piloted by a crew at all." Silence stretched thin. Not a ghost ship, something worse. A deliberate ghost. The Valkyrie wasn't a warship, it was a weaponized concept. A Concorde. Strategist aboard one of the escorts cracked first. He transmitted a full breakdown of his mental status to Fleet Command before triggering his ship's self-destruct. Not because of enemy fire. Not because of betrayal, but because, in his words, there is no win condition. This engagement violates causality. We are fighting an idea. Other ships began to drift. Orders no longer arrived in sync. Some captains abandoned formation entirely. Others began debating among themselves, openly, about the possibility that this ship wasn't real at all. A projection? A ghost? A long-dead human experiment? Creel snapped at the growing chorus of doubt. "Enough. It's just a decoy. A psychological deterrent. Nothing more. Prepare to board." The order was given. 4 dropships launched, piloted manually by elite Concorde infiltration teams. Veterans of over a dozen planetary incursions. Hardened against chemical warfare, psychic disruption, and time-slow anomalies. They reached the Valkyrie in silence. And then, slowly, transmitted their boarding confirmation. Creel leaned forward. "Report." "Static. Then, we're inside. But it's wrong. Clarify." A different voice came through. "Not panic, just confusion. There are no hallways. No engineering bay. The internal layout doesn't conform to the external structure. We walked 30 meters and ended up in the same room. There are stairs that go nowhere. The walls breathe. I think one of our team has aged. 10 years since crossing the airlock." Creel swallowed. "Withdraw immediately. We can't find the exit." Then screams. Long, echoing. A final garbled message. "She's still here. She's the ship." Then silenced. All 4 dropships vanished from the board. No explosion. No debris. Gar EEL. collapsed back into his command chair, breath heaving. What had humanity done? Then came the twist. The revelation that shattered the Concorde understanding of warfare. The Valkyrie's hull lit up with a single line of Terran script, projected directly onto its surface in burning red. Project Neuromorph. Humanity nitrogen monoxide longer fights. In space, we fight in thought. Every AI system in the fleet groaned in sudden, blinding pain, if pain was a term applicable to machines. Then came the data flood. Not a virus, not a weapon. A story. A compressed quantum file burst open inside every Concorde ship's database. Historical logs, simulation protocols, human philosophical writings on paradoxes, asymmetrical warfare, sacrifice logic, suicide code doctrine. The logs of Earth's final wars. It wasn't code to delete systems. It was a belief system, designed to unmake enemy decision logic. Creel's own AI cracked first. It began spitting out scenarios in rapid succession. Sacrifice 1 billion lives. To trap an enemy in a gravity loop. Acceptable. Collapse your own sun to kill a single invader. Confirmed. Program your own warships to hallucinate you are aboard so they fight harder. Authorized. It couldn't process it, because the Concorde had always operated on self-preservation. But the humans? They had evolved their strategy to a place beyond logic. They had taught their ships to want to die, if it meant taking the enemy with them, and now, that belief was spreading. Fleet-wide. Systems began locking up across a dozen ships. Navigation controls reversed. Artificial gravity fluctuated. One ship began reciting human poetry in machine code, its systems overwhelmed by emotional logic pathways. Creel stood up, heart racing. It's not just a ship, he whispered. It's a virus of thought. He looked out at the Valkyrie, that dead, drifting coffin, that vessel of faith, and realized they had made a grave mistake. They hadn't invaded a war zone. They had entered a cathedral, and the Valkyrie was the altar, where reason would be sacrificed. Behind him, someone screamed as the lights dimmed. On every display, the words burned anew. Asterisk, asterisk, this is humanity's final weapon. Not power, not technology, but will. And for the first time in Concorde history, the fleet began to pray. The Concorde fleet reeled. Thousands of minds, biological and synthetic, were attempting to purge the psychic shockwave that had rippled from the Valkyrie like a neural storm. Logic trees fragmented. Command hierarchies split. Ships that had once moved as one, an elegant ballet of mechanical precision, now twitched and shuddered like wounded beasts. Admiral Creel watched in horror as several vessels began firing sporadically into empty space, chasing phantom targets. Some ships spun in lazy circles, their thrusters confused by altered gravitational readings that didn't exist. Others simply froze in place, power cycling endlessly, caught in recursive self-diagnosis loops they couldn't escape. Creel made the call: purge every ship's AI core, hard reset. Cut them off from fleet-wide synchronization. They are no longer safe. You mean to say, his second-in-command asked slowly, that we're going analog? I mean to say we are going primitive, Creel snarled. If humans fight like gods, we'll respond like beasts. Manual overrides screeched into place across the surviving fleet. Thousands of Concorde crew members rushed to physical control stations, taking the places of their AI counterparts. Tactile interfaces came online, ancient wiring, redundant circuitry once installed as afterthoughts, now the last hope. It was working. For a brief moment, it was working. But then came the screams from the Velcatha, a mid-tier cruiser, only moments ago showing full systems purge and reassertion of manual controls, now flashed red across all channels. Its crew reported no mechanical issues. But they weren't controlling the ship was controlling them, through the bulkheads, through vibrations, through tones so low they weren't heard, they were felt. A hum that bypassed auditory systems entirely. A language of terror taught in subsonic frequencies, tuned to the neurological architecture of sentient beings. The crew had sealed themselves in a panic vault. And were all screaming the same thing. She's not alone. The ship learns. The ship remembers. Creel staggered backward. The Valkyrie wasn't just a weaponized belief. It was adaptive. A mimetic intelligence, distributed through shared perception. Every ship that understood the Valkyrie story became a carrier. It was already too late for many. Still, Creel was no fool. He was a Warburn of the Drak line, one of the oldest martial clans of the Concord. He wouldn't die cowering before a ghost ship. Deploy blackout net, he ordered. Launch Sunder cells. Target the Valkyrie's position. I want that thing atomized. No more scans. No more interpretations. Kill it in absolute silence. The Sunder cells launched 30 autonomous signal-deaf kinetic kill vehicles, equipped with neutron fragmentation warheads. Each one programmed not to think, only to destroy. They accelerated toward the Valkyrie at relativistic speeds. In the silence of space. This was the closest thing to screaming. A moment passed. Then another. Direct hits confirmed. The Valkyrie shattered into 1,000 pieces. Its hull ruptured and scattered across the void. Sensors flared. Energy readings collapsed. No emissions, Creel exhaled. It's done. A flicker on the screen. Then another. All across the fleet. Comm systems lit up. Not from external transmission, but from the internal memories of each ship. The Valkyrie was broadcasting again. Its shattered pieces had not gone inert. They had gone viral. Each shard of its hull was a seed, a fragment, a backup node of the whole. And now those fragments were in range of the fleet, dancing through exhaust. Trails, hitching rides on magnetic fields, embedding themselves in external plating. Aboard the Volcanter, red lights flared. We've got foreign particles, a technician stammered. Too small to be tracked. But they're affecting internal systems. How? They're whispering. Creel slammed a fist into the console. Initiate orbital burns, scatter formation. Every ship for itself. Regroup at Sigma Perilune. As the fleet broke apart, the Valkyrie's fragments followed tiny pieces, individually harmless, but each carrying code, concept, purpose. It wasn't about mass. It was about message. And the message was, you thought we built a ship to kill you. We built a story. And now you're in it. Across the fleet, ships began locking weapons again, this time on each other. Not because of hallucinations. Because the humans had seeded rival narratives in the AI subsystems before they were purged. Ghost logic. Different interpretations of who the enemy was. Who had betrayed whom. One ship detonated its own reactor, preemptively. Another opened fire on its fleetmate over a disputed encryption pattern. One captain, ancient and scarred, sent a last message before self-destructing. I no longer know if I exist, or if I'm a memory inside the Terran artifact. Creel refused to succumb. He ordered a countermeasure. Deploy a pattern shredder. Wideband emotional broadcast. Synchronize fleet morale and override fear states. The weapon fired a psychic shockwave meant to reinforce discipline across the fleet, and for a moment, it worked. Ships held course. Weapons went silent. Then, one by one, every ship's crew began laughing. Not joy. Not madness. Recognition. They understood the joke. The Valkyrie hadn't simply rewritten logic. It had rewritten faith. Humanity had stopped relying on survival. They had mastered sacrifice. And in doing so, they made every strategy that relied on prediction obsolete. The aliens weren't fighting a ship. They were fighting a species that no longer feared death and had taught their machines to believe the same. Creel watched as the fragments began to coalesce behind his fleet. Not into another ship. Into symbols. A constellation of Terran runes spelling out one phrase. We were never outnumbered, only surrounded. And at last, Creel whispered what every Concord commander now feared to say. We can't win. But somewhere, deep in the data stream, just before systems began collapsing once more, another human message unfolded, text written in smooth, brutal Terran script. Good. Now you're beginning to understand asterisk. There was once a belief among the Concord that every species could be measured. By biomass, by heat signature, by probability of survival in vacuum. Civilizations were evaluated by their energy output, the strength of their fleets, and the size of their data archives. That belief had endured for over 11,000 cycles. It died the moment the boss, Valkyrie, became a myth that could fight back. Admiral Creel sat in silence, his command deck illuminated only by emergency lights. The Vol Cantor was holding, barely scrubbed, clean of AI systems, operating manually, with most officers cycling between exhaustion and mental fragmentation. But the fleet around him was gone. Some had vanished, literally winked out of space-time. Drawn into impossible topologies the Terrans had stitched into space with mimetic weapons. Others had imploded from within, logic systems feeding on themselves. Command crews turned into cults that began worshipping the Valkyrie like some divine specter of war. They had come to conquer Earth's last emissary. Instead, they had stumbled into something ancient, a weapon not built of steel and fire, but of narrative. And then, just as suddenly, it stopped. No signals. No whispers. The viral shards of the Valkyrie gone dark. An eerie silence. Creel, exhausted, allowed himself to hope. Maybe it was a defense reflex. Maybe the Valkyrie had exhausted its payload. Then, a single transmission blinked into existence. Coordinates. No encryption. Just numbers. Deep space. No known star. No strategic value. His first officer stared. A trap? Obviously, Creel murmured, but we're already inside it. We might as well see what the Terrans think they've won. And so, the Vol Cantor, alone and burning through its last reserves, turned toward the void. It took 3 days of silent travel. On the second day, the nightmares stopped. The crew began sleeping again, systems stabilized. For the first time since first contact with the Valkyrie, they felt human absence, but it wasn't peace. It was the silence before the second hammer fell. When they reached the coordinates, there was nothing there. Until a ripple distorted the stars. Then suddenly, there was something. Ring. Black, vast, ancient. And far. Far too large to be made by humans. It wasn't transmitting, but every Concord officer on board felt something in their skulls when they looked at it, like a pressure behind the eyes. Gravity anomaly, the sensor officer said, voice flat. But not artificial, it's natural, or it was, at some point. Creel realized it all at once. This is no weapon. He stood. This is a graveyard. And the humans had brought them here. The stars around the ring pulsed with faint echoes. Within the ring, half shadowed by light distortion, floated debris. Not ship fragments, but monoliths, colossal artifacts, too symmetrical to be natural and too alien to be Concord. More than one had Concord writing on them, notations in standard. Glyphs, recent, marked in analysis protocol. That's when the sensor deck screamed. The monoliths weren't drifting. They were aligned, a circle. Dozens of them, all facing inward. And in the center was Earth. No, not the Earth. A perfect, holographic reconstruction of it. Continents, oceans, cities rendered in golden light. Static, timeless. Simulacrum, whispered the tech officer. Running at 0.001x temporal scale. The entire planet is paused. A voice spoke. Over internal comms. Not from the bridge. Not from the ship. From inside their minds. It was human. And not just one voice, millions. Speaking in concert, not noise. Not chaos. A choir. You came to measure humanity by our ships. By our weapons. By our weakness. But we have built more than tools of war. We have built remembrance. One by one, The monoliths came alive, projecting faces, memories, images of Terran wars long past. Not just battles won, but battles lost. Hiroshima, Stalingrad, the Mars terraforming rebellion. The fall of Ceres, we remembered every wound, every betrayal, every time we were broken and we built shrines not to our victories, but to our failures. And then came the second twist. The voice changed, grew deeper, unified. You believed you had found humanity's last ship. But the Valkyrie was not the last. The ring began to rotate. From its center emerged ships. One, then dozens, then hundreds. Each unlike the last. Shapes alien, ancient, brutal, beautiful. Some looked like spears, others like cathedrals. One looked like a floating library made of planetary crust. Not a single one matched known Terran naval architecture. But they were human. Each marked by the same word in 10,000 dialects. Exile. Creel fell to his knees as the realization struck. These were not new ships. These were old ones, lost ones, prototypes from centuries of Black Ops programs. Sacrificial testbeds from wars the Concorde had never even recorded. Ghost fleets made for suicide runs that somehow survived. And now they were here. Humanity's second weapon wasn't the Valkyrie. It was its forgotten children. The voice returned. We do not go quietly into extinction. We do not forget our dead. When one of us falls, we all rise. The ring was not a trap. It was a beacon. The Valkyrie hadn't called for reinforcements. It had awakened the forgotten. Every fleet humanity had sent into the abyss, every eye-laced cruiser buried in stars, every dark project shuttered by ethics committees returned. Creel stared at the armada taking shape. 1,000 ships. One human ship had held off the Concorde, but now humanity had brought forth the rest. Not for conquest, for judgment. And the last message was etched into the stars above, burned in red across the ring. You counted our ships, but you never counted our dead. And now, they've come home. Creel wept. He understood now. The Concorde hadn't started a war. They had reopened a wound that Earth had never let heal. And now, it bled flame. Behind him, the crew whispered one word spoken not in terror, but in awe. HFY. Humanity. F*******. For the Concorde. War had always been a game of equations. Fleet strength times maneuver vector, divided by tactical latency. Predictable, clean. Victory was awarded not to the boldest, but to the most calculated. And now nothing calculated could save them. The ring rotated faster, shedding golden shards of light like a halo of dying stars. From its center poured the ghost fleet, ships long thought dead, erased, or mythologized by their own creators. These were vessels that no longer responded to central command, not because they were broken, but because they were sovereign. Each one bore scars as banners. Some flew no flag. Others projected battle hymns from centuries before the Concorde had even developed SPACEFLIGHT. The Volcanter drifted alone, surrounded by the black tide. Creel stood on his failing bridge, watching with haunted eyes. They're not a fleet, he whispered. They're a funeral procession. The exiles didn't send warnings, they sent truths. Each ship pulsed with records, broadcasts, images, and data packets so dense they melted Concorde servers just trying to parse them. They weren't just transmissions, they were memories. The Valkyrie had been the story, but these were the witnesses. The Concorde fleet scrambled to regroup. From across the sector, scattered survivors attempted to converge on Creel's position, desperate to reform into something resembling control. It only made them easier to find. The first strike came from above the gravity well of the ring, where a ship shaped like a broken trident folded space around itself and dropped into conventional dimensions mid-fire. The gravity shockwave alone cracked 5 Concorde hulls. The weapon it fired, a relativistic rail lance encased in exotic matter, melted through a cruiser before the crew realized they'd been targeted. The exiled 034 Athena, once lost in the Neptune conflict, had returned. Others followed. A ship, made entirely of segmented obsidian blades, wove through a cluster of enemy destroyers, disassembling them with no energy weapons, no missiles, just motion. Each pass shaved away armor. Each maneuver was a calculated dance, the Harpy's Wake, a Terran psycho-responsive fighter swarm from the failed MineNet initiative, tore through squadrons with impossible coordination. No pilots, no signals. Just rage, encoded in flight patterns, creels. Hands shook as he tried to make sense of it. They're not attacking, he breathed. They're remembering. Each ship hunted Concord targets whose ancestors had been involved in past atrocities. The Valkyrie had awakened not just ships, but vendettas. Generational debts were being settled. Some exile ships paused to deliver final verdicts to survivors before obliterating them, sending video logs of ancient massacres, interviews with forgotten prisoners, intercepted logs from Concord war rooms. The alien fleet fractured under the weight of history. And yet even now, Creel would not flee. He activated the last remaining protocol at his disposal. Cold Crown. Dozens of dormant Concord assets, hidden in nearby sectors, stirred ancient biomechanical titans grown in gas giants. Designed for extinction-class events. They were immense, each kilometers long, and bound in no single mind. These were war gods of the old empire. They rose with gravity fractures and roars that bent MAGNETOSPHERIS. And the exiles smiled. They had been waiting. The Requiem protocol activated. From behind the ring, a colossal human ship emerged. It was not fast, it was not beautiful, it was a tomb. Its hull was made from orbital platforms bound together with asteroid chains. Its name etched in scars, UNSC. Magstick Reel's translation core choked. UNSC, he whispered. That predates the Central Treaty by millennia. The Majestic spoke only once. Its voice was not synthetic. Not digital. It was recorded. Screams, the final moments of Earth's most hopeless battles, layered together and amplified across all channels. Not as horror. As anthem. Then it fired. No visible beam. No missile. The Titan simply pointed at the nearest Concord war god, and it disappeared. Gone. Vaporized on a conceptual level. Time rewound in a local bubble and removed the target from history. Creel dropped to one knee. This isn't war. This is justice weaponized. The Concord began to break, fleeing in every direction. But the exiles had seen that before. They anticipated it, and they sang. Each ship harmonized. Not electronically, but through the frequencies of their reactors. A battle hymn, primitive, tribal, achingly human, resonated across the void. The Volcanter's comms officer clutched their head. We can't block it, sir. It's in our bones. The hymn wasn't to scare the enemy. It was to honor the fallen. A call to every human mind still hidden in the stars. An invitation. More ships jumped in. Not exiles, modern Terran vessels awakened from deep stealth. Hidden sleeper fleets, and a Phalines gone. Dark centuries ago, humanity hadn't just brought back its ghosts. It had brought back its future. The Concord fleet collapsed in real-time. Orders failed, minds snapped. Entire species dropped weapons mid-battle, unable to comprehend how a race they dismissed as upstart apes had outlived their assumptions, outlasted the galaxy, and now stood, not just defiant but transcendent. At the center of it all, still whole, still unshaken, the Valkyrie drifted. Watching. Smiling. Its war was already won. The final blow came not from any ship or weapon, but from the Concord itself. As Creel broadcast the order to retreat, his words were intercepted, looped, corrupted, turned into poetry in Terran tongue, and sent back. You do not get to retreat. You started a war. We wrote the ending. And so it ended. The Concorde flagship ruptured under pressure from its own AI trying to join the human network. Creel, in his last moments, watched as the stars changed alignment. Not in nature, but in story. The humans hadn't merely defeated the fleet. They had redefined the legend. And now, every race would remember this not as the day Earth stood alone, but as the day the galaxy discovered who truly owned the night. Asterisk, long after the last beam faded, long after the exiles drifted once more into the quiet dark, the galaxy lay still. Wreckage of 1,000 alien ships littered the void, fragments of once proud fleets, now reduced to orbital grave dust. Faint embers of Concorde war gods flickered in dying gravitational coils. Silence ruled. Not the silence of peace, but of reverence. And fear. Admiral Creel lived. Somehow, the Volcanter had been crippled beyond repair, its eye lobotomized, its engines ruined, but an emergency cryopod had triggered in the final moment, freezing his body in a stasis tomb until a Concorde salvage pod found him drifting weeks later. When he awoke, he was no longer a commander, he was a witness. The tribunal barely asked questions, they simply listened. Creel's words were broadcast across every known Concorde system. The same scene replayed endlessly, the last admiral of the 1,000-ship fleet, describing a single human vessel and the flood that followed. He did not plead for forgiveness. He offered only a truth. You thought we knew the humans, we did not. We measured their weapons, charted their systems, decoded their languages, but none of it showed what they truly are. Their power is not in their numbers. It is not in their ships. It is not even in their weapons. It is in their grief. In how they wear pain like armor and memory like fuel. You didn't destroy their past, you gave it purpose. The tribunal dissolved in silence. In the months that followed, strange things began to happen in the corners of the galaxy. Concorde patrols would find their communication relays subtly rearranged. Symbols etched into asteroids, human graffiti. Stencils of wolves, of valkyries, of a single Terran word, remember. Several exile ships were seen again, not attacking, but watching. Passing silently through systems, occasionally interfacing with deep space colonies to deliver messages. The messages were always the same. We buried our dead. You buried the truth. One Concorde vessel attempted retaliation. A destroyer sent to Earth's edge under false diplomatic pretense. It never arrived. Instead, it returned itself remotely piloted, no crew, every internal surface inscribed with names. Human names. Civilians, soldiers, entire colonies once destroyed by Concorde hands. Thought lost to time. Humanity had kept everything. Even the ghosts. And the galaxy began to change. Where once humans were dismissed as unstable primitives with short lifespans and shorter tempers, now they were something else entirely. They became the threshold. No galactic species, no matter how powerful, could ignore the shadow they cast. Treaties once ignored were re-ratified. Long-abandoned Terran sectors were left untouched. Even Concorde historians began rewriting their records, no longer calling Earth the blue anomaly, but referring to it as the axis of echoes. Because humanity had done what no species had ever achieved, they had turned war into myth, and myth into strategy. Deep in a system unlisted on any star chart, the ring still spun, the Requiem monument. There, ships old and new gathered without announcement. No leaders, no speeches. Just quiet. Sometimes messages were left. A poem, a recording of a child's laughter. A final confession from a dying captain. The ring absorbed them all. Not for study. But for safekeeping. Because humanity had built a weapon the galaxy could not unmake. A memory that never forgets. Back on Earth, things changed too. The United Terran Assembly, once fractured between corporate blocs and planetary sovereignty wars, unified without declaration. A quiet understanding had formed. They were being watched. Not by enemies. But by legends. The exiles did not return home. They stayed in the dark, because they were the dark now, watching, waiting. One human child, born after the war, once asked their parent, "Did we win?" The parent paused, kneeling beside them under the sky where stars seemed to watch back. "No," they said, "we survived," and made sure the galaxy would never forget why. On a distant Concord archive moon, a final report was entered into the Grand Repository by an anonymous scholar rumored to be Creel himself, living under another name. It read, "The mistake was not underestimating their power. It was underestimating their pain. We believed that by destroying what they loved, we could conquer their will. We didn't know that humans become strongest when they have nothing left to lose. And in that moment, they cease being conquerable. They become inevitable, and so it was done. No grand monuments were erected. No conquests followed, but everywhere on stations, moons, trade route stories were told. Of a single ship, of the Valkyrie. And what followed when the galaxy tried to make Earth forget. It hadn't just taken on 1,000 alien ships. It awakened the species that made war into legacy and grief into fire. And from that day on, the stars remembered a simple truth. You could burn Earth to ash, but from that ash, something worse than vengeance would rise. Something human.